You really like him, don't you?
Yeah.
Let's just skip. This girl's a genius.
I'm counting on you to keep these guys focused.
And I don't want to hear anything about girls and parties.
Would you like to stay,
I think that I should.
even if it's just for a moment?
Oh, God.
Where do I go from here?
I really messed up.
No matter what decision Emma makes, your life will have been affected. You might have to forego playing college football.
Don't let him tell you what to do. This is your decision.
Maybe we should think about getting married.
There is another choice,
It's a baby, Em.
and you said you would support me.
I do support you, but I can't condone murder.
Don't you tell me what I can and can't do with my body.
With the American presidential election looming, the debate over abortion and the right to life is heating up south of the border and is also getting a lot of attention here in Canada. Today's guest is Jim Ball, the director and co-writer of the Order of Rights film. He joins me now via Skype from Westminster, Maryland, where he lives. Welcome to the show, Jim. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit about your background and how this story came about.
Well, my background is I grew up Catholic. My dad was the first pro-life advocate I ever knew, and I thought he was crazy at the time. I ran away from the church for a number of years. I was a musician, had a recording studio, a film production company, and then I got converted in 1992. And I became a priest when I went to the pro-life march, and someone walked up to me and asked me if I was a priest, and I'd been thinking about it. So I gave up everything that I was doing, film, music, recording studio, and stuff like that. Went to seminary, but a few years later, I started thinking about making films again. But instead of making secular films, I made faith-based films. That's the short story.
That's the short story. Yeah, just like that. You just gave up all your life and became a priest.
Yeah.
So did your personal beliefs influence your decision to participate in this film that addresses such a controversial issue?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, I wrote the film based on a series of sermon that I preach usually about once a year on the 4th of July, which is Independence Day in our country. And I always talk about how the preamble to the Declaration has a phrase, the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which I say is not just a nice alliterative phrase, but it's the actual way that you determine how rights are determined. And people said to me, I never knew that before. I'm pro-life, but I didn't understand that. And so I figured, how do I make a movie based on a sermon without being preachy and didactic? So I thought, well, let's make it a courtroom drama.
Interesting. Okay, so why another pro-life film? So what's different about this one?
Well, we've seen a number of good pro-life films. This one basically deals with a couple things. One is the philosophical and theological moral framework, which is how we do our jurisprudence, our law here. And so it has the reasoning and rationale behind it, of course, in a script that is a story, but at the same time, it has information that a lot of people have never heard, including people who are pro-life and or Christians. Second is a lot of people really point out that this film deals with the father's rights in this issue as well. And a lot of times the men have been kind of pushed to the side saying, you don't have a right to talk about this because you're not the one bearing children. And of course, I've dealt with a lot of people over the years as a priest, and ministry who have had abortions and know that it's not just affected, of course, the baby, but also the mother, but also the father. The fathers go through a lot of guilt, and there's a lot of wounding there that needs to be healed. So, and since I'm a man, I wrote it from a male perspective in that way.
Wow, are you getting a lot more sort of male audience because of it, or sort of people saying, hey, I never thought of it that way, or anything like that?
We have. One of our people showed just the trailer at a convocation at Liberty University in Virginia. And he said a young man walked up to him and was just weeping. He was a Christian. He said, but this was my story. Just seeing the trailer let me, he said he just got touched by it. So they ended up praying for him for like half an hour or something like that.
Oh.
So We believe that, it certainly, I mean, it doesn't just affect the baby, it affects the parents, it even has a spiritual effect on the children, other children as well at times. We've had people that were dealing with stuff, we prayed for them and did like a ministry to them, and children were set free of things. So we understand that there's a lot of spiritual implication in this as well.
Interesting. Now, can you discuss the relevance of the film today?
Well, we couldn't have put it out at a more interesting time. I mean, in our country right now, we have a Supreme Court justice who's been nominated, who is a devout Catholic. She has 7 children. 2 of them are adopted, and she's been put up as a Supreme Court justice, and she is completely on the other side of moral issues as her predecessor was, and so there's a lot of fight and warfare going on over that, and so it couldn't be timed better as far as what's going on. I mean, there really is divide in our country. I told you off screen that I live about 15 miles south of Gettysburg, and Gettysburg was a site of, one of the sites of the Civil War in the 1800s. What the main moral issue was, human rights issue was slavery, and I believe the main human rights issue today is abortion. Because a child is being deprived of its right to life, and so we're in the middle of a significant historical time, in my opinion.
Interesting. Now, as you mentioned, the American Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett has the pro-choice movement concerned, right? So do you think that there's a reason for concern? I mean, the Supreme Court justice only upholds the law and doesn't actually change laws. So are people thinking that she's going to have some sort of influence over changing the laws on Roe v. Wade? What's your perspective as to where America is headed on all of this?
Well, first of all, I just want to point out one thing. Roe v. Wade could be overturned. If it's overturned, that does not eliminate abortion in our country. Basically, what could happen is it goes back to the states. But, she is an originalist. She believes in interpreting the Constitution as it was written and intended to be understood. And so a lot of people on the other side believe that the law should be used you should manipulate it to achieve goals. And so she certainly is a threat to her opposition. There's no question about that. Will she hear another court case on Roe v. Wade? We don't know. But she certainly is not someone who's going to do what we call judicial activism. In other words, try to change laws from the bench.
Why is sanctity of life such an important issue to you?
Well, first off, I'm a Christian, and I believe that man is made in the image and likeness of God, and I believe that the value of human life is the first order of rights. For instance, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. The Declaration says that those are God-given. They're not given by government. Those rights are given by God, and government's job is to protect those rights, not to convey those rights, if you will. So life is the preeminent right. And so basically in other words, my right to pursuit of happiness, which might be my way of life. Okay, I'm allowed to pick the job I want. I'm allowed to, pick my career, but I can't do something that interferes with another superior right. For instance, in the slavery, in the abolition movement, basically the argument was that slaves weren't fully human, and therefore the slave owners could exercise their right to pursuit of happiness because they weren't subjecting another human being, taking away their rights. Well, of course, the argument was that slaves were fully human beings. The same thing started in this country with babies, saying it's not really a person in the womb, and therefore the mother's right to choose, which comes under pursuit of happiness, she can choose to have an abortion. Our argument is certainly you can choose to do what you want with your life, but you cannot take away a child's right to live because it suits you, even if it's inconvenient. We understand there are lots of tragic things that happen, but I also know many people that were conceived and raped that did not get aborted, and they're valuable human beings. Even though their beginning was not great, they would tell you, I am awfully glad that my mother chose to keep me. So we believe that God, the image of God is in man. I have no right to murder another human being, to kill them, and it is murder. Now we don't. Just so you know, in this film, we put forth the pro-choice arguments exactly the way they're made. We do not treat them unkindly. I have friends that are pro-choice that I love. I disagree with them, but I don't think they're evil, even though I think this is a moral evil. So we did not want to convey them, just make them evil people, and just write a kind of, just make a straw man. We wrote what they actually say, but we also wrote what our position is, and at least when people see it, they can't unhear the argument.
What was the most difficult aspect of this film for you?
Every part. We've had spiritual warfare going on with this almost every phase of the way. As soon as we started to, we did a kickoff banquet for some people who were giving some money for it. I got drastically sick for about 2 months straight. It was like COVID for 2 months. I couldn't stop coughing, and I was exhausted. When we started shooting, I had 3 cameras break down, which they never break down. They just stopped working. Step by step, it's been like that. People getting sick in unusual ways. I don't think that everything bad happens is warfare, but I also know when there is spiritual warfare.
Interesting. So, what did you learn from this movie that surprised you?
That's a good question. I maybe I've been involved in the pro-life movement as a priest. I'm in the Charismatic Episcopal Church, which was formed in the pro-life movement. I've been down to Washington D.C. and prayed almost every year before the Supreme Court. And when we're praying there, we're praying, and they're protesters protesting us who are shouting, all kinds of vile things. They'll assault us physically. So we're not unaware of the warfare aspect of it. But with that said, making the movie, it was sort of another layer. I've done exorcisms, I've done a lot of stuff like that before, but seeing a level of malevolence in the spiritual realm is it's a little. It actually surprised me because I thought I would know what it was like, and it got even harder than I thought.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. So, Jim, what do you want the audience to take away from this film?
Well, for those who are pro-life, I want them to. A lot of them have never had a way to argue their position. So I want to at least arm them with that. But I'm hoping to reach the people in the middle. There are a lot of people that are not pro-choice or not pro-life. They'd rather not think about it. And I think that's where the battle is always. The people just do their jobs. They're decent people. They don't want to think about moral or political issues. But I would hope that a lot of them would look at this and say, actually, I need to be involved in this. Every great movement has had its, for instance, the abolition movement wasn't that big, but the people were determined. There were people that were pro-slavery and were abolitionists. There were a lot of people in the middle that just sort of wanted to live their lives. So we're hoping to reach a lot of people in the middle. And then there's some people that are, like I said, I have a friend of mine that I hope she watches it because she disagrees with me on the issue, but I think she would watch it and hopefully it would touch her heart in some way.
And finally, Jim, how and where can people watch the movie?
They can watch it or rent it or buy it on Amazon Prime, on iTunes, on Google Play / YouTube, and on Vudu.
All right. And there's a website too, right? orderofrightsmovie.com.
That's exactly right.
Is there a link there to it as well, or a trailer?
There's a trailer on there on orderofrightsmovie.com, and there are also the icons of the different platforms. If you press on the Amazon button, it'll take you right to the site and to the movie itself.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we are about out of time here, but Jim Ball, director and co-writer of the Order of Rights film, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for having me.